Welcome. I'm Bill Green, Director of the Logan Museum of Anthropology here. I teach museum studies in anthropology, as many of you know. Also affiliated with the Three Rivers Archaeological Society here, which is a chapter of both the Wisconsin Archaeological Society and the Illinois Association for Advancement of Archaeology. And this particular program is a co-sponsorship endeavor. Not only does it serve as the regular monthly meeting of the Three Rivers Archaeological Society, but it is also joint sponsorship of, sorry if I miss anyone here, of the Logan Museum and the English department through its film studies program and journalism and history, and I hope I'm not missing any others. We're pleased to present Patty Loew here this evening. Did I miss athletics? Patty Loew is well known to Wisconsin TV audiences and to fans of documentary filmmaking overall. She's also had a long career in commercial broadcast journalism, as well as a current career that it's one of these juggling acts that I don't know how people do this. An academic, a professor in life science communication at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a producer for Wisconsin Public Television, and a video documentary film producer as well, and has been involved in projects such as The Way of the Warrior, which is a very well received film about Native American soldiers and veterans. Weekly program on Wisconsin Public TV that airs every Thursday, and a wide variety of other projects. Patty's also the author of pretty much the standard book on the history and current status of Wisconsin Indians called Native Nations of Wisconsin, right?
Indian Nations of Wisconsin.
Sorry.
And Native People of Wisconsin is the children's textbook.
Right, so the red one is the adult version, the orange one is the children's version, right? Okay. And these are excellent introductions to historical as well as modern surveys of Wisconsin Indian people. We're really happy to have Patty here with us tonight because she's involved in a new project that resonates, I think, very nicely with the interests of a lot of people here on campus, combining history and athletics, two very popular pursuits here on campus. And so, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Patty Loew to discuss Sacred Stick, the indigenous origins of lacrosse.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you stopped because I thought maybe I died. I mean, that was... No, I'm quite a gal. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a topic that really floats my boat. I'm a member of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. This is a game that my people played for thousands of years. It's a game, some of you may know this, but lacrosse is becoming the most popular sport. It's the fastest growing sport in America, with something like 350,000 people playing it in organized fashion in this country. So many of them don't know that this is actually an indigenous game. And I know it's very popular in the Northeast, and I want to talk about some of the outreach components that we hope to include in this. And as the title suggests, Sacred Stick, this is more than a game. It's a made-for PBS documentary that we had hoped would be airing this fall, but it's going a little bit slower than we had hoped, and so it's most likely going to air in May of 2011. Michelle Danforth is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, who's from Green Bay. I'm Bad River Ojibwe. If you know anything about lacrosse sticks, and I would encourage you to take a look at the sticks that you have in right here in the Logan Museum, they're different. The Iroquois sticks, or the sticks used by the Haudenosaunee, which is the term they use for themselves, are elongated and really are the sticks that the modern sticks are based on. The Ojibwe sticks are much smaller. They look, they're kind of about the size of a Big Bertha golf club, and almost shaped that way. If you think about a war club or a drum stick, it's much smaller. The netting is about that big, and I always tease my co-producer that, you know, her people had to use those big basketed wussy sticks. So we like to kid each other about that. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, am I speaking loud enough? Do I need to stay close to that? Okay, good. It feels a little bit better to kind of wander. One of the things we found early on was that there are a surprising number of creation stories about lacrosse. It seems like almost every tribe that plays the game has a story that's an ancient story. Often they begin in the sky world. The Passamaquoddy story is one of my favorites. It involves an old chief whose son, this is a very, very long story, so I'm giving you the Reader's Digest condensed version, but there's an old chief whose son disappears, keeps disappearing, and the people don't know where he goes. And one night, the old chief follows him across the Milky Way, which is the path of souls to a lot of native culture, in a lot of native cultures. So he follows him along the path of souls to the sky world, where he sees these sort of ethereal, maybe human entities playing this game, and they're wearing rainbow belts, and they've got glowing headdresses on. And he realizes that the brightest light in this game is his son, who has been transformed into this otherworldly being. And so the son comes to him and tells him that he needs to return to the earth world, which the old chief does, and the son visits, but he splits his time between the sky world and the earth world. And as the story progresses, you come to understand that the sun is Venus, the morning star, which is visible, you know, at dawn and at dusk, but not in the dead of night. And so there's some sort of interesting astronomy things going on in the story as well. But Greg Gaetti, who has written a couple of fabulous books, my favorite, and a text that I use in my Native American environmental issues in the media class, is called Native Science, Interdependent Laws. And another one is Spirit of the Game and Indigenous Wellspring, which is a really interesting book, especially if you're interested in athletics. This looks at the culture and psychology and the world views of Native American games. And in this book and in our interview, he talks about how many of these stories deal with the epic struggles between good and evil and light and dark forces, and they manifest themselves in these creation stories about lacrosse. So we thought it was just a really wonderful topic. And although the game has become a sport both in non-native and native communities, the traditional game, which is only played with wooden sticks, is still a medicine game. It's played when someone requests it, someone needs to be healed, they'll play a game. If there's some conflict in the community, a lot of times the game will be a substitute for open, more aggressive kinds of conflict or war. So there's a lot of layers to lacrosse that we thought was really interesting to explore. The other thing is lacrosse is a rite of passage. Lacrosse was seen as a ceremony for young men to learn the art of war. And so the training that went into lacrosse was also training that the community would give these young men in order to prepare them to be warriors. Lots of, now I'm getting into an area that Bill probably knows a lot more about. How did lacrosse start? That was one of the questions we were really interested in exploring. Because it's played across North America and in Central America as well. And so was there a single origin? Did it start with the Aztecs and Mayans in some of those fabulous ball games? If you've ever been to Chichen Itza or Tulum or some of the other ruins in Mexico, there are these amazing ball courts and carvings and pictographs that suggest that it was a game that was played to the death. And the victors, as I understand it, had the privilege of losing their heads. So I'm not sure if you really wanted to win this game or not, but obviously there's something else going on. It's not strictly, a game of an athletic game. Or did it have multiple origins? Because we see lacrosse in a number of communities across North America. The game has variations from community to community, but and the sticks are different. Certainly the Haudenosaunee sticks, those used by the Six Nation Iroquois people, look different than the sticks that my people used. And those sticks were different from the ones that the Katoa, the Eastern Cherokee, used. In that community, people played with two sticks. And so there are lots of variations on this game, and we were really interested to find out, did it begin somewhere and sort of diffuse and take on different permutations as it moved across North America, or did it arise in multiple origins? Did it have multiple origins? And one of the things we found is that the jury's still pretty much out. If you talk to the Haudenosaunee, they insist that the Iroquois invented lacrosse. And that doesn't go over very well in lacrosse and Potawatomi and Menominee communities because they think the game originated there. And the Eastern Cherokee and the Creeks who played in the Southeast, or played it in the Southeast, now played in Oklahoma, take issue with that as well. We do know that the game was being played when some of the earliest European visitors arrived because we have descriptions of it from Catlin and Carver and Eastman and various other trackers. What would you call Franz Boas in the early days? I mean, he wouldn't have thought of himself as an anthropologist, although he gave rise to anthropology, right?
Oh, chronicler maybe?
Chronicler. Okay. From these chroniclers, we know that lacrosse was being played across North America. And from the descriptions, we know that entire communities played. We know that women played, sometimes with men. Sometimes they had their own games. And people, some of these games would start at sunrise, and they would go to sunset, and they would continue the next day and the next day after that. 3-day long games, all day long. Ferocious, broken bones, people died. This was a game that was played. It would have probably made a good entry in the extreme sports that we see today because there were very few rules. It was get the ball to hit the post, get the ball to go through a hoop, get the ball between two. It depended on where you were. There were different variations of the game, but we do know that that entire communities played it, and sometimes communities played against other communities. And then there was this function of lacrosse as a substitute for war. Tom Benham, who is a Smithsonian musicologist, who was really got interested in lacrosse because he saw that the lacrosse sticks looked very much like the drumsticks. And he was all about studying drums and flutes and rattles and various other instruments that Native people use even today and have used for a long time. So he got interested in lacrosse. He lives on Madeline Island. And he knew stick makers, so he started doing some research and looked at the way the game is played in various communities, and has a wonderful history called Lacrosse, Little Brother of War. And one of the things that the stories he tells, based on a fabulous rare book in the Wisconsin Historical Society collection, is of an incident during Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763. A little background for those of you who might not know much about Pontiac's Rebellion. The French, during the French and Indian War, which is not the French against the Indians, it was the French and their Indian allies against the English and their Indian allies, had this prolonged war that ended in an English victory. And the French had to turn over their 14 forts, which included Fort Pitt and Fort Detroit and Fort Michilimackinac, Fort at Green Bay, Prairie du Chien, St. Louis, et cetera, et cetera. So the French turn over their forts, and the native people that lived around those forts didn't much care for the way the English did business. They didn't extend credit. They were much more uptight about things like race. The French, we like to say we assimilated the French pretty well. They sent their eldest sons to learn our language before the trading companies would set up shop somewhere. There was a lot of intermarriage. They wore our clothes. They embraced our canoes. We did a pretty good job of assimilating them. And the French were very, very relaxed in terms of extending credit. It's still an exploitive relationship, but the French had a different way of approaching things. The English were much more rigid, didn't extend credit, and so there was this unsettled feeling among the tribes around these various 14 forts. So Pontiac coordinated this attack, this mass attack, whereby each of the native groups around these particular 14 forts would attack on the same day so that the British couldn't move reinforcements from one fort to another. And the Ojibwe and Sauk were tasked with taking Fort Michilimackinac in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So, and this coordinated attack was scheduled for the King's birthday in June. So my ancestors informed the British troops garrisoned at the fort that they were going to have a game of lacrosse. They were going to play a game of lacrosse for the amusement of the troops in honor of the King's birthday. So the spectators had lined the area, and unbeknownst to the British, and it's a nice warm June day, so why is everybody wearing blankets? Well, they're wearing blankets because they're hiding the weapons for the lacrosse players who actually are warriors. And the game keeps moving closer and closer to the fort, and whoops, the ball goes over the picketing. The British soldier picks it up, throws it back. Play goes on. Whoops, the ball goes over the picketing. British soldier picks it up, throws it over. The third time the ball went over the picketing was the sign for the players to attack the fort. So the play continues. ball gets thrown over the picketing for the third time. British soldier opens up the gates to throw the ball back, and the spectators throw off their blankets, toss the weapons to the lacrosse players, and the fort was taken in 12 minutes. We know this because there was somebody who survived the attack. And by golly, you'd think I would remember the guy's name. Alexander, something Alexander. Private Alexander, or Sergeant Alexander, I'm sorry, his last name is Alexander. Anyway, he survives by hiding under Charles Langlade, for whom Langlade County is named. Charles Langlade's wife is in the fort, and Mr. Alexander hides in her dirty laundry on in the top floor of their apartment and survives the attack. There was a couple of other French in the fort. None of the French were harmed. All the British were killed. And so now the Ojibwe and Sauk control the fort. And there were several people who were taken captive. The British soldiers were all killed. There were several other traders and family members that were taken hostage, and there was negotiation, and they were returned to their families. But in this coordinated attack, 12 of the 14 forts fell. The only ones that didn't were Detroit and Pitt. And I believe it was at Fort Detroit that Jeffrey Amherst, who was the Indian agent at the time, gave Pontiac, who was at Detroit, and that fort wasn't taken, but it was held. It was kept under siege for a period of months. And Amherst gave us our first example of biological warfare when he had smallpox-infected blankets delivered to Pontiac as supposedly a goodwill gesture, asking him to, end the siege and go home. Pontiac did just that because his people got very sick, and so Detroit and Pitt never fell. And then eventually they were all returned to the British anyway. But great story, good story to tell in a PBS documentary, especially since that fort, Michilimackinac, has been restored by the Michigan Park Service to its 1963 state. And they do a reenactment every year of this lacrosse game. The British costumes are impeccable. They're all perfectly historically accurate. The native people we found is kind of like, yeah, that breechcloth. Lots of faux leather, weird Indian attire by committee, faux leather stuff from Tandy Leather. So we had to, it was very challenging as a filmmaker to shoot this because, I'm a historian, or at least I pretend to be one, and so accuracy is really important to me. And we had done quite a bit of research on what people would have been wearing during that era, and the people who were representing the native people in this reenactment were not historically accurate. So we had to shoot a lot of wide shots and then go back and shoot do some recreations with some Menominee and Oneida young men in wearing what they would normally have worn during this era, and shoot close-ups. So you'll when the film comes out, look for the interesting wide shots to close-ups and see if you can see where we had to do some fixes. But we're telling three stories. We're telling the story of the taking of Fort Michilimackinac. We also are doing interviews, and we're showing you some footage that was taken in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in the United Katoa, Eastern Cherokee community. And this is where the people are using double sticks. one of the things that's really interesting is that this is a photo taken from the early 60s that appeared in Life magazine. And these men are about to participate in a traditional lacrosse game, and they are purifying their lacrosse sticks in a sacred stream. And one of the things that we learned from Jim May, who was one of our principal interviews there, is that the Katoa decorate their lacrosse sticks with a lot of fetishes that rabbit fur, because you want to be able to run really quickly, and there's pieces of various plants and animals and birds that that are noted for qualities that the players would like to incorporate. And they also sew medicine into their lacrosse balls. And you always want to play with your own ball, because your opponents have probably done the same thing too, and putting it, and sewing some things that maybe they're trying to get you off your game a little bit by sewing medicine that's going to psych you out. So we thought that was really interesting, that even this ancient game, the spiritual aspects of it, the cultural traditions are still there even today, and people are still playing lacrosse the same way. They still purify their sticks before they play. They still sew items into and decorate their lacrosse sticks with items that that are representative of their totemic affiliations. And the third story we're telling is of the Iroquois Nationals. This is a really interesting story, and we're sort of bookending the whole documentary around a game that the Iroquois Nationals, who were prevented from competing on the world stage until 1989. I mean, this is so recently. But the history of this is pretty interesting. Well, first of all, before I get to the history and George Beers, lacrosse almost disappeared during the 1930s and 40s. Young men and women were really discouraged from playing lacrosse because it was thought to be too savage, too violent. And instead, they were encouraged to play baseball. This is my grandfather right there, who was a pitcher on an all-Indian baseball team at the turn of the century. But, think about it, baseball with all its good statistics and ERAs and RBIs and, math, and it's a team sport, and it's kind of clean, there's no contact, and so, this was the sport that the boarding schools were really pushing on Indian children. And I shared a story with Bill at dinner tonight about a friend of mine at Bad River. I don't know if any of you know Joe Rose, who's the director of American Indian Studies there. But he said when he was a boy growing up in the 40s and 50s, they were really forced into playing baseball and discouraged from playing lacrosse. And he said, but on the weekends, they would go out to the baseball field with their lacrosse sticks, and they would pitch batting practice or play games with lacrosse sticks. So, there'd be a batter with a baseball bat, but the pitch would come from a lacrosse stick. So even an 11 or 12-year-old kid with that extra, torque and trajectory could hurl a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. And could be why there were so many Indians in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and they're good hitters. Boy, when you're 12 years old and facing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs. But he was telling me about this, and he described the ball, when it came off a lacrosse stick, as like an aspirin tablet coming in. It was small and fast. But they played one game where they played the game, not just batting practice, but they played a game using lacrosse sticks. And unfortunately, one of the boys who was playing the game got hit presumably by a fast, you know, a high fastball, and got knocked out. Hit him in the head, knocked him out. Somebody ran, got some water from the well, and threw some cold water on him. And when he came to, everybody felt so guilty that not only did they let him take first base, which of course you would do when you're hit by a pitch, but they let him come all the way around and score a home, you know, score a run because everybody felt so bad for him. Which is really interesting when you think about it. I mean, it's almost a metaphor for what's going on in Native communities with, you know, these different cultural norms forced on them, different new traditions, everything's changing. Out with the old, here's the new, assimilation, forget lacrosse, here's baseball, but yet, you know, here's some kids being very creative and sort of accepting almost only so much and still hanging on to some of the traditions of their community. So lacrosse really either went underground or was pretty much submerged during the boarding school era, which would have been 1868 to 1934. And at the same time, the sport is getting really popular with non-Indians. Really interesting. So in Indian boarding schools, Indians are being told, don't play that game, it's too savage, it's too primitive, it's too rough and tumble, somebody's going to get hurt, and of course they did. You know, here, try this civilized sport on for size. How about baseball? But in the 1850s, William George Beers, in Canada, is developing some lacrosse teams. Lacrosse is being played at some pretty exclusive clubs, athletic clubs on the East Coast here on this side of the border and in Canada. And in 1867, he sets down the amateur rules for lacrosse. And Article 9, Section 6, no Indian must play in a match for a white club. What was going on was, first of all, when Indian teams played against white teams, they usually, to put it mildly, you know, had no trouble winning the game because they played with abandon. This is the way the game was played in Indian communities. And a lot of these elite white lacrosse clubs were enticing Indians to play for them, and that created some resentment, and so it seemed easier, as far as Mr. Beers was concerned, to just keep Indians out of the game. So this rule continued from 1867 until 1989. But Indians are playing the game in their community. They're playing in Iroquois communities, the Cayuga, Seneca, Oneida, Mohawk, Tuscarora, Onondaga are playing the game. And the Iroquois Nationals, and they're fielding a really elite team called the Iroquois Nationals. And their director, Chief Oren Lyons, okay, they're supposed to be, here's the excerpt.
Before there was earth, before, when everything was water, here, the game was played.
Less than 2 weeks away. It's an important weekend this weekend. right? We got to come together as a team, okay, for one purpose, and that's to represent the colors. So, they don't show any people. Let's bring her in. Boys. All right, beautiful. 1, 2, 3, there.
The Critters game, it's called that because it comes from our creator. That's the divine origin of the game. In the early going of our creation, our creator came from the skyward.
Well, at the time, the players are spiritual beings when they're playing the game on behalf of the person. And so the wooden stick that we have is so important. We can't use a plastic stick in these medicine games. That part of it is a very precious part of our life, and we guard that all the time.
I think the Iroquois boys are really proud to be there at this tournament, and we always want to do well whenever we get the chance to represent our people. Playing for the Iroquois Nationals is just something, it's just more of pride. Yeah, I mean, you just have so much pride in the fact that, you know, you're listening to your anthem right with Canada and the US, and you're ready to go, you know, stepping on the floor in the finals and the World Championships against Team Canada.
So the way we look at it, it's a lot more than a sport. It's a lot more than winning. It's who we are. Dieu Chiquai, the Wada.
Well, it's in 16:9 high def, so that kind of got squeezed. Anyway, so during the, right before the Iroquois Nationals were allowed to play in international competition, Chief Oren Lyons, who was one of the people in that excerpt in the trailer, as it were, is pressing to have the Iroquois play. And the International Lacrosse Federation people are saying, well, you know, we're not keeping you out. You can play for, you know, the United States or Canada. I mean, your players can, well, first of all, they couldn't because that law said they couldn't. They couldn't. The International Lacrosse Amateur rules said they couldn't. But second of all, they didn't want to play for America, or they didn't want to play for Canada. They wanted to play for their nation, the Iroquois Confederacy. Their own nations, I should say, because there's 6 of them in the Confederacy. And so they kept pressing and kept pressing and kept pressing, and finally they were allowed to play in 1989. And they did pretty well. They kept getting better and better and better, and then hit this, you know, these games happen once every 4 years. And so in 2007, they beat Team USA for the first time, and it's very exciting. I mean, the game is very exciting, although it wasn't very close. And then they find themselves against Team Canada in the finals. And now lacrosse is Canada's national sport. I always thought hockey was, but lacrosse is actually Canada's national sport. And so here this game, you know, is back and forth, and it goes, it's tied at the end of regulation, and then it goes into overtime. And I won't tell you who won because you have to watch the film. But really, really exciting, a fairy tale kind of story for us, and a wonderful story, a contemporary story to let people know that there's a certain cultural continuity to this. And these players do have a different mindset when they step on the court. They're not playing the medicine game because they're not playing with wooden sticks. They're playing with plastic sticks. And that's another interesting little detour in this documentary, because in Onondaga, Mr. Jacques, who's the stick maker and making these hand-carved sticks, his family had a lacrosse stick factory. No machines, everything was handmade, but they employed about 40 people during their heyday, and they were turning out 1,200 wooden lacrosse sticks a week during the late 1960s. Well, then the game becomes popular in the non-Indian world, and all of a sudden, you know, more and more colleges are playing it, and they introduce, some of the sporting good companies introduced plastic sticks, and within a matter of months, the demand for wooden sticks all but disappears. And so they went from, 1,200 sticks a week to barely 1,200 sticks a year. People got laid off, and it was very traumatic, and really an irony when you think about it. And so that was another little detour that we took in the documentary. But we wanted to explain the cultural layers of this sport, the spiritual component of lacrosse, and the fact that even in a non-spiritual venue, like the International Lacrosse Championship, the indoor championship, these players are still carrying a piece of their culture into that competition with them. They're listening, as he said, to their anthem, their national anthem being played along with the Stars and Stripes and O Canada. This is really meaningful. They're playing a game that they developed and have shared with the world, and the world kept them out for 100 years, but now they're back, and look out, they're pretty good. They're really good. So this is the story we're telling in this documentary, and the epilogue is, for those of you who might not know this, the Iroquois Nationals, as well as other members of the Six Nations, travel on their own passports, or did, in this era of 9/11, post 9/11. TSA would not let them out of the airport to get to the international competition held this year. So they were not able to compete because they couldn't get out of the country. Their passports were not recognized, even though they are sovereign nations. Check the Cherokee Nation cases and Justice John Marshall's ruling. Indian nations are sovereign nations, domestic dependent nations, but sovereign as well. So it's an interesting, albeit sad, epilogue for us. And our plan is to, in addition to having this documentary, to create a website with K-12 materials. We hope to create, with Wisconsin Humanities Grant, a traveling kiosk to tell this story of the indigenous origins of lacrosse and have it travel to high-profile NCAA collegiate lacrosse championships, have it travel overseas. We want to bring in stick carvers as artists in residence and have them have summer programs in each of these 3 communities to teach traditional stick carving to kids. And then we'd love to get the President's Council on Fitness or a large athletic company, Nike, excuse me, to give us some funds so that we can set up some youth lacrosse programs on these 3 reservations. Native Americans have some of the biggest challenges as far as childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes goes, and so we think this would be a really great complement and really have a holistic approach to letting the world know, what lacrosse is all about and whose game it really is. We're willing to share it. So with that, I'll stop and answer any questions, or if You want to share any stories? I always love to hear stories about lacrosse. Yeah.
What were the balls traditionally made of?
Well, they were made of leather and often packed with something that was probably soaked, you know, like a moss, or it depended on. There's really, it's different. I mean, it depends on where you go, but oftentimes animal sinew was wrapped tightly and then covered in leather and sewn. But there are other kind of balls. Some of the balls were harder. So it kind of depended. Here in the Great Lakes, it was usually sinew wrapped, kind of the way a baseball is made, you know, where the string is wrapped and then the outer layer is sewn, of leather is sewn on. Yeah.
And like the lacrosse games that I've been to, I've noticed that there's sort of a tradition of like taking a knee when someone's like injured or whatever, that, and like there's sort of a strictness and respect about it that I don't see in other sports. Is that from the Indigenous roots, or is that something else?
You know, that's a good question, and one I don't know. I know the sticks raised in the air is definitely a tradition that's continued, and that non-Indians have borrowed. But you know, in a lot of athletic competition, there's always, you know, there seems to be the huddle with everybody kind of, you know, pumping up whatever they're pumping up and getting that testosterone cooking.
How are the double sticks used?
They're you know, I give my right arm to be ambidextrous, but but they're pretty ambidextrous with it, really. You know,
It must be shorter. And at least when I've seen a traditional stick, it'd be hard to wield with one hand.
well, well, the long ones are those wissy, big basketed Haudenosaunee baskets. Are the lacrosse sticks that have the smaller baskets are, you know, they're pretty easy. But the double balls, I mean the double sticks, they caught and threw. I mean, and they back and forth with each other too as they ran. You know, one of the things that happens in lacrosse is as someone's running, they're manipulating the rackets, so they're cradling the ball, and in the double balls, sometimes when they're running, they're moving it back and forth, which, you know, is kind of one of those things. But they also catch it and throw it with each arm as well.
So how is American college lacrosse perceived within Indian nations?
I think, I haven't really sensed much resentment. I think actually there's kind of a source of pride, especially if there's a native player playing for Syracuse or Ithaca or, you know, Cornell, or one of those other, you know, really kind of powerhouse. Is it Providence in New Hampshire? Might be the women's program, but yeah, no, I think mostly it's, gee, I wish people knew that it was our game, you know, because a lot of the college players, if you to visit some of the websites for the college lacrosse teams out east, hello, you know, in the history of the game, the history doesn't start in 1867 when a lot of them, you know, start their histories, or 1880s, whenever the college was founded. So that's disappointing, and I think this is one of the things that we heard loud and clear, and one of the reasons why we thought that traveling kiosk was a good idea. You know, let's remind the NCAA where this sport came from.
Is there some area of the lacrosse history that you wish you could have done that you weren't able to get to with this documentary?
What I really would have liked to have done, but I found out that it's extremely expensive, is I had this vision of this Monet-esque, you know, impressionistic visualization of some of these creation stories, you know, with rainbow belts. I mean, how beautiful is that? And, you know, the glowing sort of humanoid figures. And we tried to get a National Endowment for the Humanities grants. Those are the folks with the really big, deep pockets. But I'm going to sound like sour grapes, but heck, I'll be honest. Boy, they sure seem to like Lincoln, you know? What the world needs is another Lincoln documentary. If you got a story about Lincoln, boy, I think you're much more likely to get NEH funds than something like this, quite frankly. Did I say that? I think I really did. Okay.
You
Well,
need to find Abe Lincoln roots on the lacrosse.
what I have to do is I have to find out if Abe Lincoln ever played lacrosse. That would do it. But yeah, we tried, and to do 5 or 6 minutes of animation, it was like $80,000 to do 3 minutes, 4 minutes of animation, the way we wanted to do it. And so we had to rethink that and downsize considerably. So, yeah.
I've enjoyed your in Wisconsin program so very much.
Oh, thank you.
Very much, yeah.
I work with really great people.
Try to get it all the time, we're public television enthusiasts. But would there be more relating to sometimes the Wade House and different things historically? I belong to the Wisconsin Historical Society, but there are so many good things, or the Bill and Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
On these things that are going, but can you
Do you want me to put a plug in for some of the historic sites?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
I do too. We have a relationship with the Wisconsin Historical Society, and for a while we were doing historical features, and there was actually a program devoted to that. And I think they tried to get to all the historical society-owned properties.
Okay.
Because I did see one on Villa Louis, and I don't think they got to the White House though. Definitely they got to Old World Wisconsin and the
Old World, yeah. We just a real meeting on that storm here this past.
Yeah.
I haven't been up there. Did you see it? Has it been bad?
I haven't
I haven't
been
gone
up
up
there.
there.
But I know we also did something on the H.H. Bennett property in the Dells.
Yeah.
But I'll suggest that when I get back. I promise you that I will say I went to Beloit, and they want the White House. They want history.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patty.
Yes.
I wondered if you looked at any creative writers that had a lacrosse story, like Sherman Alexie or so.
Oh, you just mentioned my favorite writer. I love.
Yeah, I just wondered if there were any stories out there with lacrosse in it, like a plot or something. Because I would think that'd be an interesting connection.
I didn't find any. I found some native stories written down, but mostly a lot of these stories are in the oral tradition. And a lot of them because they're sacred stories. Some of them we couldn't tell because, they're just not meant to be told. Some of these stories can only be told when there's snow on the ground. So they can't be written down because then if somebody reads them and there's no snow on the ground, then it violates a cultural taboo. But, I read voraciously, and I think I've read, if I say this, I'm probably going to be wrong. There's probably something I haven't read, but I think I'm aware of most of the native authors out there, and I've never seen anything written about
Interesting to
lacrosse.
have a competition, for young people to write
Oh,
short
that's a-
story.
That's
among
a
the
great
native-
idea. And I wonder, if these stick carvers, if we're able to pull off this artist in residence thing, that would be a really interesting skill, a little bit of downtime, another skill for them to have. I like that, actually. I like that a lot. Should I tell my Sherman Alexie story?
Yeah.
Before he was an author, he was actually a stand-up comedian. And I belong to the Native American Journalists Association, and we hired him to do stand-up comedy at one of our conferences. And then we sort of roped him into being part of a plenary session that was, it had some pretentious name like, the future for Generation X Indians or something like that. So Sherman Alexie is up there as one of the 3 people who's speaking to this topic of Generation X and the Native experience. And he's just, kind of feeling feisty, and he gets up and he starts talking about how he's really sick to death of the American Indian movement, and Russell Means doesn't speak for him, and he doesn't speak for, many people and, of his age and Native American. He's going on and on and on, and mentioning Dennis Banks and some of the other leaders of the American Indian movement, but for some reason just kept mentioning Russell Means, Russell Means, Russell Means. So he finishes his rant, and it's a plenary session, so there are microphones set up, and 3 of them. And this tiny little Dene woman, this Navajo woman, who's dressed traditionally in a cobalt blue velvet dress, and she's got, she's doubled over from all the silver around her neck. She's got her hair in the coronets on the side. And, if she's a day under 90, she's quite old. And she, kind of walks up to the microphone, and 3 big Native guys, because the microphone is, like her nose is here and the microphone is up here, so everybody's falling all over themselves to pay respect to this elder and get the microphone, down. And she's got this gnarled finger that she starts waving, and she says, "I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. Russell Means married a Dene woman, and when you say bad things about Russell Means, you say bad things about the Navajo Nation." And she starts, and Sherman Alexie has kind of a large Adam's apple, which is looking like one of those South American frogs, throbbing. And he just wants to die. And this grandma just doesn't let up, and she just gives it to him for about 10 or 15 minutes, and there's this, it's like somebody pulled the shades down on the windows, and everybody's kind of, oh, this is beyond awkward, this is really, really uncomfortable. And she finishes, and then she said, "I'm just kidding, we think Russell Means is a son of a bitch." It was just one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. Oh, and the relief on Sherman Alexie's face. Indian humor, you can't beat it, especially from a 90-year-old Navajo. So anything else about lacrosse, or Native books, or public television?
You said that lacrosse is the sport from
Fastest
Canada?
growing.
Oh, fastest growing.
Fastest
For
growing
Canada,
sport.
it's their national sport.
Yeah.
So is there a lot of history? I mean, if it's their national sport, I'm sure that they documented it pretty well and everything.
Yeah, there actually is, but we have to, in order to get federal funds, you have to do a filmography along with a bibliography, and we found one 10-minute film that was kind of an amateur film made on the topic of Native lacrosse. There's plenty of, lacrosse is big there, and you can find, lots of sports programming involving lacrosse, but there were no documentaries that explored the indigenous aspects of lacrosse. But I guess, and when I said 350,000 people play it, I think it's 350,000 people in the world every year. 350,000 more people in the world play lacrosse every year. I think that was the statistic that I kind of garbled. But yeah, I've been in Toronto on Hockey Night in Canada, and if I were the owner of one of those hockey franchises, I think I'd be arm wrestling the lacrosse people for bragging rights to Canada's national sport. But as far as I know, lacrosse is still Canada's national sport. Any other suggestions I should bring back to my producers at PBS for story ideas from this area? We always like that. Okay, well, be good. Thank you very much.